Behind Cleveland, Beyond Cleveland are BC Media Productions. Our stories and episodes are made possible by the generous support of BC Media, friends, supporters, sponsors, and community members like you. If you are moved or inspired by any of the conversations we have shared, interviews, or content we've produced, we invite you to become a vital part of our growing community. Please subscribe or follow us online at behindcleveland.com or on one of the many platforms where you find your favorite content.
Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're going beyond the plate, behind into the kitchen with Chef Ryan Matthew Boone. His path to culinary acclaim is anything but typical. Entrepreneur, culinary consultant, former special education teacher, with a story that highlights the human spirit's determination and need for community and nourishment. Boone's career didn't begin with wielding knives in a fancy kitchen. His first tools of the trade were crayons, creative arts, compassion, and, occasionally, a classroom griddle. Before kitchens, before all the accolades, Ryan worked as a behavioral therapist, using food and creativity to connect with young people with autism. His lens on life, deeply human, refreshingly unorthodox, and rooted in purpose. But like all good origin stories, his passion eventually pulled him into the culinary world full time. He climbed the ranks, becoming executive sous chef at Cleveland's former culinary gym, the Greenhouse Tavern, where he not only weathered the storm of the restaurant's final days, but stood as a fierce advocate for the staff. Today, he is the owner of a thriving business called Chips and Dips, a consulting business that specializes in working with food and hospitality sector. His company is called Chips and Dips, which is gaining significant traction here in Northeast Ohio. So, Chef Boone, welcome. I've been looking forward to this conversation, being a full foodie myself, a former agriculturalist. Let's peel back the layers. First, your origin story. Take us back to the chapter working with youth, being in the education system. Tell us, how did those early experiences shape your outlook and your path to the kitchen?
Yeah, well, of course, thanks so much for having me to chit-chat with you about my creative fun. My career started in these classrooms kind of out of the space of, I was going to school for psychology and kind of didn't know what I wanted to do with that, experience. And I had a good friend that was working at this school that asked if I wanted to get a summer job. I think I was like 19, working with students on the autism spectrum and see if it was something that I would enjoy, kind of putting my studies towards. Came in to a school that was very student-led in their teaching pursuits, rather than trying to tell these kids that this was how they had to learn sitting in a desk, paper and pencil. It was very much, how do you learn best? Is it on a walk? Is it out in the park? Are we doing, curriculum that's really centered and geared towards your interests? And it really just kind of resonated with me, who always kind of struggled to sit in a chair and be, your textbook A+ student. I just really felt this calling to be like, be who you needed when you were younger, as, the saying kind of goes. And I fell in love with this idea of the student-led, creative arts-driven learning. And I spent almost 7 years opening 3 different schools with that group. One of them was like a community garden, kind of experiential, outdoor-driven learning space. That's where Damon and I, who you've chatted with before, worked really hand in hand together. We opened a more creative arts-driven space out in Broadview Heights that was more geared towards visual arts, and we had like a live music rehearsal room and a maker space for the students. Then I worked in a more traditional setting that was called the Academy, where it was like more geared towards students who were working their way back into a traditional school system to kind of learn that skill set, and how to take what they maybe learned at some of these other spaces and apply it to going back into like their public schools or whatever.
Have you found yourself in the kitchen? Is that how you found yourself in the kitchen, through this experiential learning and playfulness? Is that how you incorporate your creativity? Is that where all this, where you're currently involved in the food stuff and all the stuff that you do with restaurants and such? Is that where this comes from?
It's kind of a duality of sorts. I think how it all started is, I think we all know that the education fields are not always the most financially incentivizing career paths to go down. So summer break, winter break, I found myself like, hey, I need a job to make a little bit extra money. I would end up working in bars or restaurants or whatever that, needed quick hands for summer season or whatnot. On top of that, I grew up super in love with Good Eats and Rachel Ray and Emerald Live, and I always really loved food. My first job was at a grocery store, deli, making fried chicken and JoJo's. So it also just was something I really enjoyed and wanted to pursue as a career. And I was kind of told, no, you should go to college and you should, working in restaurants is hard and it doesn't pay well, and all of those things can be true. But I really just enjoyed it. So between needing a summer kind of gig and getting a job at the Greenhouse Tavern as literally a food runner, prep cook, whatever they needed help with, I got a chance to learn all of this really cool stuff. They started teaching me how to make bread for the Cubanos for lunch. And I took that into my classroom and just, as much as we allowed our students to drive what we were doing on the day-to-day in the classroom, they also really allowed us to bring our interest to connect with the kids into projects. And that's, where kind of my mind was, I have these kids that are grumpy in the morning and they don't eat breakfast and they have these hectic, chaotic mornings, and, they come in with mom and dad and they're yelling and, having a tough time, and, maybe if I just make them some breakfast, we can start the day off on the right foot. And if I can make it fun by doing pancakes and then letting them pick a candy bar for us to chop up and put in the pancakes as opposed to chocolate chips, then maybe they'll actually eat it. And then maybe because they ate something, they'll be able to attend to their schoolwork today. I mean, it was kind of this trying things out and seeing what worked. And as we did that, it became the thing. All these students, I want to go to Mr. Ryan's class for pancake party on, this day. It just kind of snowballed, and the kids really resonated with it because I think it gave them a very, very similar satisfaction that, cooking gives me, is you get to eat the cool thing you made at the end of it and enjoy it and share it with other people, and they get to tell you that they enjoyed it. And that often, is an incredibly validating feeling for those kids who struggle sometimes to be told that they're doing a good job in school or whatever. But, if they make a pizza and share a piece with somebody and they get told, wow, this is the best homemade pizza I've ever had, it just lifts their spirits in a way that, not a lot of other things could.
Yeah.
So really, that's kind of how.
So truly rich enrichment and literally breaking bread with.
Yeah. I think in a sense, whether you're left or right or, of a different culture or of a special ability, as, we used to call it, special needs, when we're all sitting down having dinner together, a lot of that doesn't matter. It doesn't come up. It's not polite to talk about per se, as, our parents would have told us. Eating is a time for everyone to come together and to, express a sense of community and gratitude. And, I think that that's something I really deeply believe as a chef, and that's what our duty is to do. And I think a lot of that came from seeing how much it changed and impacted a lot of my students' lives to be a part of these culinary programs. And we, partnered with local restaurants, and we would take the kids each week to 4 different restaurants to do job training, and they absolutely loved it. And some of those kids now have meaningful jobs in kitchens, and they were kids that their parents I never thought they would work. And they ended up, enjoying getting to roll silverware at the restaurant and wipe off the tables and, wash the dishes and, just get to be a part of the thing was so fun and cool to them. And I think I brought a lot of the feeling and hope into, what I've done in restaurants and kitchens. Is it's a place for the misfits and the oddballs and the, people that march to the beat of their own drums.
Yeah. Truly, a purpose. What is life without purpose? So, yeah. So reflecting on your time actually at Greenhouse Tavern, let's talk about that for a second, where the staff felt that they kept the restaurant open or afloat. What were the most significant, perhaps even difficult lessons you learned from that experience? From teamwork to resilience to navigating the operational realities of a demanding kitchen environment, but also having to deal with the very real experience of an absent management or leadership.
Very good question. I think when I look back in hindsight, to my time at the Greenhouse Tavern, that was, 6+ years ago, I really learned how difficult this business really is and how, I think on a surface level, easy to, look at the ownership team and say, oh, they did this wrong or they did that wrong. But the longer it's been and the more stories I've heard, the more gray it all becomes. I think it was a real eye-opening experience in terms of just what a tough business the restaurant business really is. Like, you can be doing $20,000 in sales and super busy every night of the week, and you can still mismanage your money and have bad investor agreements. And I have, learned a lot in the time since then about just really, truly how hard it is to get something and keep something sustained and open. But I think it really fortified, me and one of my chef buddies call it this ride or die mentality of, don't give up the shit. I was, at one point like, well, if I'm not going to get paid my last check, I'm not going to work my last shift. And then I was like, no, we don't do it because it's the money. We want to provide the guest one last time to come into their favorite restaurant, to have one of their favorite meals, to, sit where they proposed to their wife 7 years ago. And, if I get paid, awesome. And if I don't, I'm still going to be here for this last week and put out the food because people are going to be here. And it is, for me to do, I think it really fortified a lot of relationships with the people I still cook with today. And it also made us all really have to come together and, a kitchen that should have been run by 7 or 8 people was being run by 3 at the very end because cooks weren't coming in. If I'm not getting paid, I'm not coming. I'm like, I get it. I respect that. You don't run this place and, you need to pay your bills. For me, this is half about money and half about the purpose of, why are we chefs? Why do we do this? And, for me to have walked out on my staff or the guests who were coming in for that last experience, it's just something that I couldn't go home and sleep with.
Yeah.
So, we're going to be here.
Speaking of which,
it was a tough time.
Yeah. Speaking of which, so on that note, you reimagined comfort food or Midwest comfort food, and you're quoted saying that in several sources. It's influenced by your Midwest childhood memories. And you talk about how this is something more than just a paycheck for you. So on that vein, let's talk about that. Can you share a specific memory or dish like the Golden Arches tartare that you created that vividly captures the nostalgia of pairing fine cuisine with some comfort food?
I think one thing that absolutely just super formative in my cooking career was coming to the Greenhouse Tavern and having beef tartare for the first time ever. And every word in it being very French on the menu. Cornichon and moussard and egg yolk and brunoise shallot and I forget some of the other pommes frites. Being like, oh, I've never had steak tartare, but it's raw meat. That's wild. And I ordered it. And I was in my early 20s at best. Came out, the chef told me, mix it all together, dip it with some French fries. It's delightful. I ate it, and it instantly, I was like, all of this tastes like a cheeseburger. It's onions, pickles, mustard, mayonnaise, and French fries, and beef. It tastes like the most out-of-this-world burger I've ever had. And moments like that kind of made me realize that, the thread between our cuisines and cultures is a lot more consistent than I think we would often realize. So, every culture has a dumpling of some form that's filled with something. Our regional techniques that we do them with might be a little different, and the flavors might be a little different, but ultimately, we all have a form of bread, whether it's chopped or rolled or made into a sandwich. It's a pretty universal thing.
Yeah.
I think for me, being genuine to what I grew up eating, what I had as flavor memories, watching table and reading chef's cookbooks and then being like, I grew up at the sea, pulling oysters out and shucking them with my dad and eating them. That wasn't my background.
No.
I grew up going to McDonald's,
Yeah,
and having casserole and having beef stroganoff
Yeah, you're not going to find that around here, these parts of Northeast Ohio. For
And to me, just taking all of the French technique and, different Asian cultures and different, Mediterranean cultures and taking those really interesting flavors, but viewing them through the lens of things that I actually grew up enjoying, has kind of been, I think, what I've tried to do to stay what feels genuine to myself. And, that 10-year-old kid that was so excited for 30-minute meals with Rachel Ray to come on so that I could learn to make some, very Midwest comfort food kind of thing and convince my mom to print the recipes and to make it for dinner. Those are some of my earliest memories of cooking. And, that's, I think, the lens I try to view my food through. Even the more composed stuff, to me should still evoke this reminds me of something, but it's just so much better, or it's such a different version or a different take, or, those moments where you get to have someone eat that bite and be like, oh my gosh, my grandma used to make hanky panky, but nothing like this. It gives us, we all want to, remember a more nostalgic and, easier time in our lives.
So you're a busy guy. You were noted saying that you have a 75-hour work week at Cordelia. It's a dream restaurant position. You are happy and to take it. You're even, there was a lot of praise around you even taking on that role. You mentioned that you love to create things and come up with new flavor profiles or merge or marry different things, different cultures, and tell a different story or help people, have these nostalgic moments. What such a grueling schedule. How do you find to be creative? How do you find time to play?
Very, very great question. I think that's one of the hardest things about the restaurant life is trying to keep yourself inspired. It is a very grueling schedule a lot of the times, especially when you're getting something new up and running and you don't, when Cordelia opened its doors, it wasn't a 2 times James Beard-nominated restaurant. It wasn't opening with much acclaim. It was, who are these guys opening this restaurant in the old space that Michael Simon had Lola? What is going on? So you were your bread baker, your line cook, your pastry chef, your expo, you had to wear all those hats. And I think it definitely forces you to find, creativity to kind of get through your day and moments to have fun with food to just make it all kind of worth the, hey, I've been here since 9 a.m. and I'm going to probably be here until midnight. And then I'm going to go home and sleep for a few hours and I'm going to come back and do it again. So it's like you have to find moments to kind of play with your food, if you will, and to create something fun because, if not, you're just laboring the day away. So sometimes it was like, I wonder if you can pour a ring of squash, delicata squash, if it would look like an onion ring, and would it be good? And, you'd mess around with that while you're setting up the fry station, and you'd come out, you're like, oh, this looks exactly like an onion ring. And then I'd come up to my chef buddies, look guys, squanion rings. The next thing you know, this becomes a dish that you're like, well, what would I serve this sauce? What sauce would I serve with these? And then it becomes a new dish on the menu. And then, that becomes the wind beneath your wings to be there for the next 12 hours that day. So I think it goes part and parcel with the hours you work and trying to find little moments in it to there's a lot of things that aren't fun, like changing fryers, taking out the garbage, mopping at the end of the night. You look for the moments to have fun and to be creative, and to, look at things and I wonder if this would work, or how would this work, or would this be good? Those are the things that keep you ticking.
Here. So you've successfully also executed a bunch of pop-ups recently. You started a company by the name of Chips and Dips Hospitality, which is described as like an umbrella company and a space that lets others grow, cook, conceptualize, and create, which you're quoted saying, with you emphasizing collaboration. Where did Chips and Dips come into the picture for you? It sounds like it was more of like a pivot in the sense that you learn from the past, not necessarily having both feet planted in the industry, but now you're stepping forward into the future per se, with one foot in that sector and another foot in a world where you are in control and you are the master. Tell us about your pivot into your company now called Chips and Dip.
Yeah. At the time of leaving Cordelia, I kind of didn't have a plan of what was next. I just knew something needed to be, but I knew that there wouldn't be space to figure out what that was until I stepped away. At that time, I was super fortunate enough to get a lot of really great offers from some really great restaurants in town to come join their team. None of them just felt like the right fit. And, I had gotten burnt out and I had gotten to a point where I knew, at arguably the best restaurant in Cleveland, I didn't want to do it this way right now. I'm going to end up here again if I just do what I did again. And I kind of worked with a couple of these restaurants. We called them a stage, and they were all great teams and great people. But I just knew, kind of like your previous question, that I watched my creativity, kind of deplete over, the years of the long hours and the late, nights of closing the kitchen and being there until 1 a.m. And I knew that I wanted to, do something that gave me the ability to feel a little more in control of my time and my personal life and my physical health. And slowly, this thing kind of started evolving in front of me, where people were willing to say, well, even if you don't want to work with us full time, we'd love for you to consult on this project. And I had done some consulting in the past, and I was like, sure, I'll give this a go. And then other people were, if you don't want to work here, we totally understand. But if you ever want to do a dinner with us, we'd love to collaborate, work together. And I started seeing this lane of maybe instead of having to pick one of these jobs, we can kind of work with a lot of these people, and we can define, kind of my own lane and my own role, kind of bringing my Midwest comfort food, have fun with food, build community through the plates that we're building, energy into these different restaurant spaces kind of became an opportunity. And, the way that I've kind of looked at it is I was fortunate enough to have people that were willing to work with me 5, 6, 7 years ago, that got me to a point where now, I can post on the internet that I'll be somewhere with 75 crunch wraps, and the next day 75 people plus show up and we sell out. But that's because people kind of taught me how to do it and brought me under their wing and showed me, here's how you make, food make sense for you. And now I just want to do that with and for other people. I bring in people to do beverage for the events. I bring in, my friends to help me run the events. One of my best friends who helps with all of my events and everything that the company does. Like, she's a stay-at-home mom who struggles to find a job that can fit her schedule with being a mom, and this allows her to make some extra money to come help with events. So to me, Chips and Dip hospitality is really in which I get to be creative and work with some of my favorite people, and I get to uplift the people, around me who support me.
Yeah. So it's more of like a community focus, maybe even dare to call it a social enterprise or a social approach, right? Is that true?
Yeah, I think its focus is helping to build the food community that we want to see in Cleveland. Sometimes that means, working with a restaurant group to bring a really great concept, to fruition with them and, make sure that it's going to run and operate in a way that makes sense. And sometimes it's community driven pop-ups that are, fun and, to support industry staff who, want to, make a little extra money or do something creative and fun and different. But yeah, I think it's definitely about building a stronger sense of a restaurant community in Cleveland, and collaboration and working together and supporting each other. And, I think the more we do that, the more we see our food community near that of a larger city.
So you mentioned the restaurant community here, how very passionate you are about it. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some things that are current policy matters, actually, that are impacting the industry, especially in a market like the Midwest. As someone with a background in food policy, former heirlooms farmer myself, I'm very interested in the origins of ingredients, how they are cultivated, purveyed, you name it. How important is how important is ingredient sourcing to you in your culinary process, as well as from the people that you know in this market, in this industry. And let's also talk about, tariffs, rising food prices, and how all of that impacts, us here in Cleveland.
Yeah. I think all of those kind of big, heavy questions were something that really hit a lot of us in 2020 when the pandemic happened and food pricing went wild and, a case of chicken wings became like worth more than gold. And a lot of us started to ask the questions, about how sustainable is this? Do we as an industry survive as food cost is going up and labor cost is going up and, policy is now driving the fact that my fryer, which is, made in Taiwan, now that's going to be more expensive too for me to order a new fryer. On an industry that operates on a 10 to 15%, profitability margin, and you get a couple percent here, a couple percent there, at the end of the year, you can go from being a profitable restaurant to one losing money really quickly. And I think in those moments are when, you realize that, well, if there's someone who, raises chickens locally that is doing it in the right way.
Human. We're all part of the same story, each seeing it through a lens no one else can. Human. We're your story, unapologetically.
I think those big questions of like, how do we survive as an industry in these very uncertain times, make you look into your backyard and into your community of, who can we support? How can we source things in a way that's, sustainable and meaningful, better? The food on the plate tastes better when it came out of the ground not that long ago. The beef tastes better when it was raised in a low stress, grass-fed, corn-finished environment in southern Ohio and not some, mega cattle farm way down south. And, those are things that are very important, I think, to us as chefs. And, it's tough because we live in Cleveland and there is full seasonality realities that we live in. We wish we could eat pizzas all year long. And, some people try to. But, for me, we eat and we cook with what's in season about, what's available at this time of year. But that becomes tough in winter. The joke, it's gravy season in Cleveland from November to, February because there's not much growing besides cabbage and potatoes and, really stuff that people tend to make these hearty plates. But even in that, I think that becomes a reflection of our Midwest heritage. It's the cold months and you want some stick to your bones food and there's not a lot in season and you're eating a lot of peas and carrots and cabbage. And, I think if you cook with the seasons, you have the opportunity to be a more profitable restaurant because, like we talked about, that strawberry didn't have to come from Mexico to get here. You can support your community. You can eat food that's better for you. And it forces you in many ways to be creative and work with what's in front of you. I partnered with City Fresh this coming summer to do some summer CSAs with them in different parts of the season because we, as non-food people, maybe go, oh, it's summer. This is what's in season. But for us as chefs, we have all these little seasons within summer that we look forward to. First, it's berry season. And then once berry season's over, we get the stone fruit season. And when stone fruit's over, we get the melon season. And looking
quite honestly, every month is a season if you are really deep into paying attention to what's growing and what's around you and what's available from the agricultural sense, as well as maybe, I don't know if you're familiar with or you partake in the whole foraging scene, but every month offers something.
Even, I think for us, I don't know if you're familiar with lamps. Lamps are a thing that, a lot of my friends go crazy for because it's the first green thing that's going to pop out of the ground after months and months and months of not getting anything, local and fresh and delicious in that regard. And then ramps come up and you get to go out in the woods and forage them and the weather's turning and the sun's out and, you're, as a chef, you're just like, oh, thank God we made it. We made it through the gray. We made it to to all these little tiny and the ramps are there for 3 weeks and then they're gone. And then the morels are here. And, and from my perspective, it's the way that, you should cook, not just because it's cool to cook that way. It's more delicious. It's more sustainable. For me, I just wrapped up a dinner series, really kind of teaching people about spring and how, we look at it as chefs of, oh my gosh, we get rhubarb. Well, first we get ramps and then we get rhubarb and eventually we'll get asparagus. And then right after that, we'll get morels. And week by week, the tasting was like a little bit different because, in the beginning of the tasting, the asparagus wasn't ready. By the last week of the dinner, it was. And telling people about that, a lot of them didn't know, because you can go to Aldi and get asparagus all year round, but you can't get great local asparagus, but a small window a year.
Yeah. Yeah, you lose the connection. I personally believe, as an agriculturalist and a foodie myself, that's an important thing. A connection to the space and the land is very important. And speaking of which, new policy, our government has just granted Bill Gates Food Corporation to be labeled as their products to be labeled as organic when they are indeed not organic. How does these new policies that are counterproductive to the whole sustainability movement, organic movement, real food movement, which these things undermine, how does this change everything for you guys?
I think one thing we as chefs, have to do is, or could do, is have the conversations to educate, to talk to our community about where their food comes from. I think that there's a lot of tough questions in our industry about, migrant workers. That's something that really affects a lot of us, as we've had the ICE raids and, attempted mass deportations. These are the people that pick your vegetables, and they work in your kitchens, and they structure pizza doughs, and they do a lot of the things that, these Americans who are pointing fingers saying, these people need to be gone, that they don't want to do. And, I guess the same could kind of be said for the new policy enacted with the Gates Foundation is, if you actually look one layer deeper, there's an entirely different story than the media is maybe trying to tell you. And I think that for us, we are by no means politicians or, policymakers, but we are storytellers and we're members of our community. And I think we're advocates for, buy your peaches from Rittman Farm down the road. Don't buy them from the grocery store because they're labeled organic. The actual farm may not even be able to afford the organic licensure and the hoops you have to jump through to be certified organic. And so arguably, even the idea of the organic movement to us as chefs is kind of silly, because really it's just policy that says a lot of things about, oh, this is the story of this avocado and this is why it's organic, because none of these things touched it. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, it's still grown very unsustainably, unethically.
Right.
There's still a lot of questions around that avocado. How about you eat from your local farm or your local farmer's market? And maybe those people can't, emphatically say this is an organic peach because they can't pay the thousands of dollars to have the USDA come out and inspect their soil and to test this and to do that to certify them, because they're a small family farm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are very much the bureaucracy of things, and we are so a society that's really wedded for some reason to stories and paperwork or things on record, when it's really much simpler than that. When all you have to do is just pay attention and involve yourself, right? If you want to know where your food comes from, then just go, like you said, go to a local farmer's market or a local farm or research one that's nearby and go and support them. That's the best way and the only way to know where your food comes from, right? So, not relying upon others to tell you what to do, what's safe to eat, where to live, how to live your life.
I think, we try, or we get so separated from where our food comes from that we almost just lose a lot of the connection to all of it, not just who grows it, but what's good and what's bad. And, I think of conversations I have with my mom who goes, oh, I had to throw this butter out. It was past the expiration date. I go, was there mold or anything on it? She goes, no. I'm like, Mom, they have to put an expiration date on everything. The butter's bad if it's soured or molded, but we don't even understand how our food works anymore because we've just, it's best by this date. The milk says it's no good, so I'm going to pour this down the drain. Well, if you smell that milk or taste that milk like your grandmother would have, that's not bad. That's not soured. It's not curdled. It's fine.
Yeah.
But they put, these policies enacted, around our food that, make us lose the connection with how it actually works.
Yeah, agree. So you found what was described as a unicorn position and bridging traditional culinary roles with consulting, conceptualization, and event production with chips and dip. Based on your journey and insight into the business side of the kitchen, what advice would you give to young chefs or people looking to get into the industry today who are looking to build a really lasting and sustainable and purposeful career, particularly outside traditional kitchen hierarchy and models?
I get asked this a lot, particularly on Instagram or, when I'm chatting with, a cook at an event, how do you do these pop-ups, these events? And I always kind of tell them, first you have to be kind of insanely unreasonable about what you want to do and what you believe you can achieve. And then go get a job in the best restaurant you can find. Learn everything you possibly can, from who brings the food in the back door to how the plates go out into your dining room, from pastry to savory to, bussing tables to how your bar program works to how the numbers to all of these things work. And until you put in your 10,000 hours and you work with great people and you have great mentors who, pull the curtain back and show you how it works. Because in our industry at times it can be a little, secret keeping, gatekeeping. But you start there and you just grow brick by brick in being passionate about what you do. And it has to resonate with you, right? I think of a friend and mentor, Nick, who said to me, you have to be willing to be insane enough to just go all in. If you're going to do this, you have to just be relentless. And that means, you're up at 7 and you're in bed at 2, and that whole day, in some regard, whether it's thinking about the plates you're putting out or the event you're putting together or in meetings or having conversations with folks like you, if you want to do this, you have to be willing to be all in. There's no half-baked in success. And I just think about that on some of the days where I'm in my 8th meeting on my 4th project with, a million things going on. And, I think that's the thing I tell people is if you, stay the course and you're passionate and you work, kind of tirelessly on your vision, I'm still in the midst of making it happen, but, you see it come to life. You see, it pay dividends eventually. At some point, I joke, it happens at a different time for everybody, but you just have that light bulb moment where you go, I'm pretty good at this. And I think that there's a real path forward in this. And, then you can start to carve out your own at that.
Yeah. And finally, being nominated as a rising star chef by Star Chefs and also being a part of helping establish award-winning restaurants in Northeast Ohio. What's next for you, Ryan?
For right now, I think we're taking a little step outside of being in kitchens full time and, wearing the many hats and doing the kind of multiple roles from creative menu design to pop-ups to whatever. I'd really love to end up back in, in another award-winning kitchen that is my own at some point. And that takes some time to build, but I've been fortunate enough to be working with some really fun people that, hopefully we're headed in that direction. And bringing another great restaurant to the Cleveland culinary landscape is something that, I've always felt passionate about and hope to do.
And that's a wrap on our second episode of our special July series of Human Stories. A huge thanks to Chef Ryan Boone for not only sharing his story, but reminding us that the path to purpose isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it winds through classrooms, kitchens, and courageous moments, all part of the human experience. And of course, thank you to our listeners, subscribers, and the community that keeps these conversations alive. And a shout out to our sponsor, Human, a Midwest clothing brand reminding us daily to embrace our shared humanity. We're all part of the same story, each seeing it through a lens no one else can. Until next time, stay curious and keep going beyond the surface. Take care now.